Bienvenue à Montréal. Je suis désolé, mon français est terrible. So, for the rest of the time I will speak in English, so that you can understand me and I don't bastardize any other language, except for English. So I'm here today to talk to you about Canada's Great Next Legacy. So the Great Next Legacy after healthcare will be the basic income in Canada. At least that's what I hope. That's what we're trying to do with this whole idea of the big push. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what is that big push, and what has occurred so far, and what activities you can expect next, and what we hope to achieve. So basically, I'm here to give you an overview of the whole campaign. And I'm really hoping that, given what we did in the visioning session this morning, the learning that we had this morning can be embedded into the campaign can grow, that the US people here can learn from what Canada is doing and perhaps start their own big push. And the international people that are here can also do the same, start their own international pushes in their own countries. So I'm hoping that's what we achieve today. As I go forward as well, we have Rob Rayner in the crowd. Rob, do you want to raise your hand just to ensure everybody knows who Rob is? Rob was the founder of the Big Push and spent a good chunk of last year putting the campaign together, and I took over the campaign when Rob became Executive Director of the Green Party of Canada. So congratulations to Rob, and I have to give him great thanks and kudos for putting this campaign together. Rob and Chandra are going to, Chandra Cosma, who will be here tomorrow, will be presenting a similar thing to the more international audience tomorrow. But first, what is this idea of the big push? The big push really does seek to build on what Sheila was talking about, some of the things that Canada already has with respect to income security, so that if we build on that, all Canadians will have income security via a guaranteed annual income or a basic income, or whatever name we might give it. The whole idea is the idea of this conference. We want to ensure that NABIG happens in Canada to provide financial security for everyone living here. We really do believe, as the sort of basis of our campaign, that financial security and the right to that financial security allows us all to live decently. So I really do believe these words. It is a foundation for a healthy society and economy. Our goals are really threefold. So the very first thing that we wanted to do was raise public awareness of basic income and answer, what is it and why might we want to do this. April 2013, I think it was, Rob and I and Chandra met in Ottawa with a number of people thinking about the viability of this particular campaign. And when we were thinking of it, we also wanted to test out the possibility of looking into these goals and seeing whether or not people actually were interested in them. And the first one about raising awareness, what we learned very, very quickly is, yes, that's all very well and good, but people really did see quickly that we want to go beyond this. So we want to build public policy as well, and have a system of support for that public policy. And we want to also ensure that that groundswell of support for basic income then moves into a commitment by politicians for a system of basic income in Canada. So I think it's entirely fitting that we're meeting here in the McGill Law School talking about fundamentally something that will have to be embedded in law here in Canada for it to proceed. I also think it's fundamentally interesting as well that McGill is really the only university in Canada that teaches, as far as I know, that teaches both common and civil law at the same time to their students. And so we really are talking about looking at law across Canada in all provinces and encompassing federal and provincial regimes. And for those of you who are not Canadian, it's very important to point out that those regimes are very important to address on a provincial and a federal level. Otherwise, programs like this probably really won't get off the ground in Canada. So how are we doing that? So for the last year, and I'll talk more in-depthly about this, what we've been doing is trying to found the whole idea of an organization to push this, to push the basic income. So Rob spent, I'm sure, countless hours putting together networks and so on and so forth, and putting together the base documents that have brought us to where we are today. And we're now in a phase of defining our policy and parameters a little bit more clearly. So we spent this morning, for example, looking at the vision of basic income in Canada, but looking at it from 4 different perspectives. So we looked at it from the perspective of what is the basis for a basic income in Canada? What is the taxonomy? And the second one is, what is the taxonomy of issues that we need to address in Canada to make this real? The third is looking at the really hard questions. So when you have conversations with the public, you'll need to be able to actually respond to the public on those really difficult questions. So one of the things we did this morning was to identify what some of those questions might be and start having, the elevator conversation about that. And then thinking about, well, we need to go beyond that and have the bus ride conversation. And then once you get the bus ride conversation done, we need to have the full lecture. So, and we need to have the resources behind it so people can go to it and know that we're actually not talking just off the cuff of our sleeves. So that's where we are now, is defining those basic parameters. The next phase, once that is done, and we're actually, you can see these overlapping as well, is we need to expand the groups in Canada to put forward the message to the public. And so we have people here like Tony Picard, who I greatly admire. I've learned in a very brief period to admire people like Tony, to try to expand the networks in your local community and get the message out to people. Because if you don't have those networks, you can't do the next thing. So educate Canadians on basic income, the rationale for it, educating them on why this might be a good thing, having their questions answered so that they become supporters of the campaign as opposed to distractors. And ultimately, we need policymakers and politicians to actually support the idea as well. So you'll hear after me at least one politician in Canada talk about basic income and how it might be implemented in Canada. But we need to have more people like Bruce Heyer, like Hugh Siegel, like Art Eggleton, and other politicians talking about this idea in a serious way. So in the past year, an awful lot has been done, and Rob, please jump in if I'm missing anything. I think the work that Rob did in the past year was absolutely incredible. The volume of work that had gone on was incredible as well. A lot of it really was addressing organizational development types of things. So Basic Income Canada has only been incorporated since 2011, and we, because of the federal government change in the Canada Corporations Act, had to reincorporate right afterwards. So in addition to all of those legal things, we've done things like web development. So if you go to the website, you'll see the shell of a website But the links to the big push, I think, are really incredible. So the amount of resources now available on the Big Push website, please go there and have a look. And the links that it's starting to develop, I think Rob has done a great job putting that together. There's been some basic resource development and fund development that Rob has done in the last year and started to take over. So of course we can't continue a campaign without doing quite a bit more of fund and resource development, and that has got to continue. The original budget for the Big Push was about $300,000 per year. We're nowhere near, of course, raising that amount of money, but other estimates that I have played around with are really, if we wanted to have a good national campaign, ideally it would be at least $1 million a year or more to have a good campaign in Canada. So we're hopeful that we can reach the first figure, but that's of course a lot of work, and it's also going to be dependent on people like you in the crowd to help us with. There's also been a little bit of development on the communications side. We have a communications team. Some of them are probably in the room today, although I can't see them immediately. I apologize. But I think some of the thinking of the communication plan that has been put together have been very sound. And the idea is you can't push out your message without communication. So a great deal of thought has been put into the whole idea of communication and how it should be communicated and so on. So for example, one of the things that will be coming out fairly shortly is a short video on basic income to help do a crowdsourcing campaign. So the fund development and communications, we have tried merging together and working together. And of course, team development. So what I mean by team development are some of the local teams that are starting to bubble up in Canada to actually take the message forward in local communities. So I think probably to date, the most elaborate one is Tony's in Kingston, Ontario, that I met with 3 weeks ago or so. And the ideas that I heard in the room were quite incredible, actually, and I would like to see that disseminated across Canada. And I don't think that that is an unrealistic goal, to see teams develop on a local basis throughout Canada, because I already have people requesting, how do I do this, from Nova Scotia, Winnipeg, Calgary, Red Deer, Vancouver. I mean, those are the ones that immediately pop to my head, but there are others as well. So this whole idea of getting local teams to actually work within their communities to do something, to do this education, I think it's very important and cannot be underestimated as we go forward. Now, I said earlier that we were in the midst of defining principles and a taxonomy to go forward. I think that's one of the key things that we've got to do to go forward, to create a new social movement in Canada. Without that basis, I think what the board of BICM and I have discussed is it's going to be really difficult to answer people's questions, and it's also going to be really difficult to bring in people if we can't determine what values the basic income guarantee is based on and what the Big Push is based on. Because the starting place for a conversation is, of course, values. So if the starting place for the conversation about the Big Push, in my limited time in trying to convince people that this is a good idea, if that starting place is an argument about you're going to bankrupt Canadian society with this idea, we're dead in the water. But if the starting place, in my experience, is dignity for all, or universality, or autonomy of the person, if we start with those basic principles and have a discussion about those principles, then the conversation about how you fund a basic income becomes completely different. And it's no longer an argument about whether or not you're bankrupting the nation. It's an argument about how do we instill dignity for all Canadians using economic resources. That's a totally different conversation. So one of our groups this morning in our visioning session, for the Americans and others that were not in the group this morning, we broke into 4 groups and each had topics. One of them was this idea of what is the basis of the basic income. So they dissected the principles and took a look at some of these base parameters. And I think rather than tell you all of the principles that it's based on, you're going to hear a lot of this discussion throughout this entire Congress in the next 3 days. But this idea of dignity for all, I heard, is not going to go away. This idea of economic rights is not going to go away. The idea of universality is not going to go away. Gender equity is not going to go away. The idea of even value for money and ensuring that there's still ample work opportunity, those kinds of principles I didn't hear were being ditched. In fact, it's probably that other principles will be added into what we do as opposed to us walking away from this. I just wanted to mention it as well, that one of the things the local groups have been asking is we need resources to answer questions. So we heard this morning, for example, we need resources on paper form and brochures and on the website to answer questions. So those local groups are great, but my big worry about the big push going forward is if we cannot keep people motivated across Canada to answer those questions, we're going to be doomed. So one of our really big challenges going forward will be to ensure that when we do develop this network, we can answer those questions. So another one of the groups this morning then tackles this, what I'm calling a taxonomy of issues related to basic income. And, pardon me, these are issues such as, what government jurisdictions and responsibilities have a role to play in basic income. So what at the federal, provincial, municipal, and even Aboriginal band level have a role to play in developing the idea of a basic income. And we have to have all of those jurisdictions talking to one another, but we also have to be able to describe what that role might be and answer that particular question. Another big one that comes up is what would be the delivery method? How would you do this? So would it be a negative income tax, which many people favor? Could it be a Demogrant? Could it be a citizen's dividend? Those types of questions we haven't landed on yet in this campaign, but what we will do is answer the question about what might some of those look like. We feel that some of these questions are probably better answered later on, but we need to investigate each of these types of questions and ensure that we have answers for the public for each of these. And more importantly, that we have answers for the local groups to respond to the questions in their community. Another really big one is what is the cutoff level? So what is the amount of the basic income? So I've heard everything from $6,000 to $24,000 per person per year. $24,000 per person per year might actually bankrupt the nation, and so it can't be that. So it has to be a much more detailed answer than just giving, here's a bottom line number, without actually being able to conceptualize how that bottom line number will work. So we have people like Jürgen in the audience who question that whole idea from time to time, and I think that questioning is really important because we have to analytically think about how do we put that together, what are the baseline levels, who gets what type of grant, does that grant get delivered, and so on and so forth. So I can't today answer any or all of these questions about what that taxonomy looks like, but again, I think I'm looking at it from the context of these local groups. Is, what is the information that we have to coalesce together so local groups can actually answer these questions. So to do that, what do we do next? Well, one of the really important things, of course, is expanding that network. So as we go forward and expand this network, my idea is that we need to look at the, say, top 20 cities in Canada and make sure there's a network in each of those top 20 cities. There's other ways to look at that. It could be that in Canada we have, 336 ridings in the next election? It used to be 308. Does anybody know?
338.
What's that?
338.
338, thank you.
All green.
I won't comment on the generalities. However, 338. It could be riding associations as well. At this point, having 338 off the bat, I think are probably, we're not there yet. I think probably more realistic at this point is let's try to get networks at least in every city. Canada has an election coming up in approximately a year and 3 months, if our Prime Minister decides that that is the actual date that we're going to be voting. Now, if that's the case, we have very little time to put together riding associations and to push on a basic income. So again, the city kind of work may actually take precedence as we move forward to do that. So to do that, the local groups, of course, need to be supported. They need the resources. We need to do fund development in the next year or so, and very quickly, to ensure that not only can we support those local groups, but we can develop a message nationally and do development of a national message. Another thing that has been forwarded as we go forward are the idea of pilots, and that came up this morning. And there was a debate this morning about the need for a pilot. However, a pilot would actually do a number of things. It would not just be an empirical exercise. It would also be an educational exercise. So if we pursue it from a different perspective, I think a pilot is probably a fairly sound idea. And there's different ways to do a pilot. So I met recently with a very large Ontario foundation who basically encouraged us to get busy and put in a funding proposal because we absolutely want to receive that proposal. So I can't at this point tell you where that is going, but I can tell you that the idea was to put an Ontario pilot together that uses basic income as an independent variable in the study, and to look at the dependent variables or the impact on what it might have on health, and the impact on work, and work motivation, and work participation. And when I had this conversation with the foundation, the person at the foundation was absolutely jumping out of her chairs, saying, get this together and do it now. Now we as a group have talked about having various types of targets. So women only, for example, in the pilot, maybe employed and unemployed, maybe urban and rural, maybe in multiple cities in Ontario. There's also, now I'm using up here the idea of an Ontario pilot, but also we've heard proposals for PEI, the Yukon, and other places as well. And if the funding could be put together, that would be wonderful. Another way to put a pilot together would be to use archival data. So and what I mean by that is these same types of independent variables could be used on data sets that Canada already has on things like the Guaranteed Income Supplement and other benefit programs that Canada has that could be seen as similar to a Guaranteed Income Supplement, or pardon me, basic income. You'll hear later in the Congress at least one researcher who has an idea for a pilot like that, and that's Lynn McIntyre, and I don't think she's here today, but she is putting together a proposal for a pilot like that, and if that is a go, that one would be in Alberta. So we do have other ideas as well with respect to pilots. The other piece going forward that we would very much like to pursue is the idea of pairing basic income with the social determinants of health. And at one point, Dennis Raphael, and many of you are probably familiar with the Canadian Facts booklet that he's put out. Anyways, he has been generous enough to give us all of his work to try to put together a network on the social determinants of health. It's a health network, but he's encouraging us to go forward on this and wants it based out of Basic Income Canada because the absolute #1 social determinant of health is income and income distribution. And the research that he does, the books that he's written, and it's quite a volume of research that he's put together now, really does say if you want to do something about health, pay attention to income. And for most Canadians now, that is not an intuitive thought. It's not something that we put together. But I challenge all of you to think about this idea. 150 years ago, in terms of health, it was a revolutionary idea for surgeons to wash their hands before surgery. We didn't think of germs having anything to do with the health of patients during surgery, until somebody perked up and went, every time we have some surgery occur, our patients are dying. And so they started to do research and looking into this. I would suggest in the same way this idea of social determinants of health is in the similar fashion. It's like hand washing, but on an economic level. So if you have dirty hands, you're going to get some sort of bug in the society. So let's wash our hands and make sure that everyone has the right to basic income. And that way we don't spread economic disease. So that's my challenge to you, is to think about it that way. The other thing going forward, of course, is yes, we'll get the networks together and the pilots and so on and so forth, but we ultimately have to do education. So the local groups will be tasked to do that largely. There will be some things that the national organization does. But one of the things we're also looking at is having a national day to actually look into the whole idea of basic income. I originally called it the Walk Away from Poverty walk. And think of it as walking parties out of your own home, where in cities across Canada you would invite people to your home, don a colorful t-shirt that says Walk Away from Poverty, and go out into your neighborhood and spread the word. We have all kinds of groups doing this in my neighborhood. The Jehovah's Witnesses come by very, very frequently. Why couldn't we do that? I have ice cream trucks going down my street just about every day in the summer, and I really find them annoying, actually. But why couldn't we walk around our community and actually ask people about this idea of basic income? Just one day a year. That's all I'm asking. And let's hook to the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. Why not? Who else? I looked in Canada and tried to find who was actually celebrating this day in Canada or doing something about this idea in Canada. And I couldn't find anybody, hardly anybody, doing anything about this in Canada. And certainly not at a grand scale. So why not us? Why couldn't we do this? Why couldn't we take this over? So the Sunday before, the October 17th, which is that day, October 17th would be a horrible day to do it. It's a Friday, logistically horrible. Let's do it on a Sunday when everybody's at home. So that would be, I think, October the 12th. Let's have this national day that we can walk around our neighborhoods. So, I don't know, maybe the US can do that. Maybe Sweden can do that. Maybe Germany can do that. Why not spread this idea around the world? To talk about basic income on one day of the year. Now, I'm running out of time. So, I think I'm only till 2:15. So, I'm going to skip this part because I said a little bit about it. But as we put the base principles and this taxonomy together, we will be developing the wholesome part of a social movement. So my mind and my thinking about the big push is the development of a social movement with particular means of success. So what we need to do is actually go forward and ultimately change legislation. And I know that's not a charitable goal, but it's not the Basic Income Canada that will be doing that. It will be the people of Canada that does that. And notice that we have to hit the green chamber, not the red one. So we need our MPs involved with this, not necessarily the senators to begin with. But to do that, again, I'm going to go back to network development, pilot development, the short term. Midterm, I think in the next year and leading up into the election, we certainly have to have the public talking about this idea. We need to know a little bit more about public opinion, and we need to inject this whole idea into public opinion and get it moving. Now, thankfully, some of that work is already happening, and the media in Canada has started to pick up on this idea a little bit. But we need to really get them to ratchet up and think about it. Because ultimately, in the long term, we want basic income for all in Canada. That's the basic idea of the big push, and changing legislation to do that. So that's what this whole campaign is about. And I hope, and I'm challenging all of you, I'm an activist. I used to be a researcher. I used to lead other NGOs. But ultimately, if we want this to live in Canada, if you, in your countries, who are not Canadian, also do this, that helps us. Because we now live in a global community. If we get this going, that's going to help you. So it's all great and good that we're here for the next few days to talk about basic income. But I guess I want to leave with the message that if we don't move it to an action phase in each of our respective countries, it's going to always sit as an academic argument and not actually move to the people that really this is what this is about. The whole idea of moving into everyday people in our community. And that's the reason that again, the theme of this conference, Redemocratizing the Economy, basic income, if we can give people money and put it into their pockets, that also, along with that, comes a little bit of the power to do something with that money. It reinvigorates the idea that people are involved in their communities, that there's a benefit for having government, and so on and so forth. It really does help to redemocratize the whole idea I'm going to leave it there. And if you have questions, we have about 10 minutes, I believe.